A very big warm welcome to everyone. The webinar will be starting in just about 5 more minutes, so hang tight and we'll see you in a bit. All right, a very big hello and a warm welcome in joining us for the President's Design Awards third webinar in the Education and Career Series, Beyond Beautiful Spaces, a Career in Spatial Design. My name is Juliana Yao and I'm very happy to be your host for today. So, of course, the President's Design Award, or PDA for short, is Singapore's highest accolade for designers and designs across all disciplines. The PDA Education and Career Series offers students, fresh graduates, and professionals interested in a career in spatial and interior design an up-close and personal opportunity to dialogue with the recipients of the President's Design Award. So the first two editions that we did in the early part of the year focus on visual communication as well as product and industrial design respectively, and it featured recipients from design studios such as Kinetic Singapore and Larry, Nathan Young Design, and companies like Dell. Both of these webinar recordings can be found on DSG's YouTube page, so feel free to check that out after this session. For more exciting updates on PDA as well as other DSG programs, all you have to do is to follow Design Singapore Council on Instagram for all of your exciting updates. But for today's webinar, I do have a couple of house rules just to keep everything session running as smoothly as possible. Firstly, please be informed that this webinar will be recorded and that your microphones will be muted throughout this session. However, you are most welcome to submit questions through our Zoom Q&A function, and our speakers will try their best to address them during the question and answer segment later on. And if you encounter any technical issues at all, please ping our technical team through the Zoom chat function. So in today's webinar, our panel of speakers will share about how they kickstarted their design careers and how you can plan for yours. What is the role of a spatial or interior designer like, and how has it evolved over the years? What are the current opportunities as well as challenges for fresh graduates and young designers in the field today? Or how can new designers actually build up a portfolio? These are just some of the many questions that our panel of speakers may just be tackling today. So for now, it is my pleasure to introduce the recipients on our panel. Firstly, we have architect Lim Kun Park, founding principal of Park and Associates and PDA 2015 Design of the Year for the Architect's Office at Kim Yen Road. We also have architect Colin Seah, founder director of Ministry of Design and PDA 2008 and 2006 Design of the Year for BBH Office in a Warehouse and the New Majestic Hotel. Finally, we have architect Ong Ker Sheng, director at Lekker Architects, and Joshua Komarov, design consultant at Lekker Architects, PDA 2015 Design of the Year for the Caterpillars Cove. Although unfortunately, architect Ong Ker Sheng and Joshua Komarov, they're not able to join us in person today, but we have a recording of their sharing. So if you have any questions for the both of them, please feel free to still submit your questions via the Q&A function, and our PDA Secretariat will share their responses in a post-event roundup emailer after the event. I'm happy to announce that our moderator for today is Mr. Fan Zhijie, who is course chair for Diploma in Interior Design in Singapore Polytechnic, as well as vice president of the Society of Interior Designers Singapore. But as usual, before we begin the session, we'll actually love to find out more from you here today. So for our audience out there, we're going to run a poll. Tell us who you are and what fields you're currently studying or working in, okay? The two questions will soon pop up on your screen. You can let us know whether you're a student or perhaps you're a fresh graduate joining us here today. You've got 1 or 2 years of working experience, or maybe you're like a veteran. You've already been in this field for a long time. Just let us know so we have a better idea of who we're speaking to today. Something else we'll also like to find out is which field you're in. It could be a mixture. You can select multiple options. I know many of you are very multi-talented out there. We've got spatial and interior design, which is what we'll be speaking about today, architecture, product and industrial design, UI UX design, viscom or advertising. Maybe you're in other design disciplines, or maybe you're not even in the design field, but you're interested to find out more, maybe make a career switch, and that's why you're here today. So feel free to submit your answers via the poll. When we have a better idea of who we might be speaking to, it might help to kind of channel those questions during our Q&A and for our speakers sharing as well. So I'm going to give you a couple more seconds or a little bit more time to fill in those questions. Whether we're going to be seeing more students, or maybe you're actually watching this from the office right now. It is 4 p.m. after all. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. So let us know which design fields you're in. We have a good amount of responses. Let me just take a look right now. Okay. So at this point of time, I do see that we have a huge amount, 58% of you are actually working professionals. Again, I think my guess was right. You all are either working from home at this point in time, or maybe you're watching this from the studio, from the office. It's great to also see lots of students in here. 39% are currently students. Also, it seems like the targeting has done very well. We've got a staggering 72% of people in spatial as well as interior design, and also a very relevant field in architecture. We've got 29% of you as well. For the rest of the mix, we've got, less than 10% in product and industrial. We've got UI UX design, or even for the non-design disciplines, 9% of people. So that's an interesting statistic to see. But again, I think it's very encouraging to see a lot of spatial and interior design professionals and students joining us in this webinar today. I hope you would have lots of takeaways from our panel here today. So finally, there is one last question I would love for you to vote on. Please rank the key topics that you would like our moderator, Zhijie, later to focus on during the Q&A segment. So we'll love to find out what is it that you're most passionate about, or like you want to discuss the most. So we have 3 options for you to pick from, whether it's the evolution of interior design in Singapore as well as throughout the world, the employer's wish list for prospective hires, and how to build up a solid portfolio. I imagine all the students will immediately click that one. Or perhaps it's guiding principles to balance demands across projects while keeping in mind the objective of sustainability and to design for positive impact. I mean, to be honest, all of these are so relevant. Can you pick more than one? I feel like everybody's going to be picking everything at this point in time. Students, number 2 for sure. So we're going to give you a little bit more time to submit the options. We'll try to make Zhijie's job a little bit easier. Maybe he'll have a very, very clear picture of the kind of questions we'll be looking forward to later on in this session. Again, a bit more time for you to think about it. Choose the option you would like to hear about the most, and I will be announcing the poll results in a bit. Again, I still think that these are also relevant. Okay, but we do have the poll results coming in. Zhijie, I don't know how to help you out on this one. We've got a very good kind of a spread out in option 1, the evolution of interior design in Singapore, 35%. Option 2, all our students clicking on that one, 32%. And option 3, talking about sustainability and positive impact, 34%. I guess it just means that our speakers as well as our moderator would have to discuss all of these topics on hand here today, all in the 30-something%. Everybody is interested to just find out all the information they can get in our webinar here today. So yeah, I trust that you're going to do a great job in that session later on. But for now, our audience, thank you so much for your participation and for voicing out what you love to hear. Now that we've gotten to know you so much better, I'm going to go right into the sharing by our speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our very first speaker for today. He is Park. He is the founding principal of Park and Associates. Park believes that good design should be relevant, yet possess a sense of timelessness that can withstand ever-changing trends. So through a mass experience in designing and managing projects, Park has developed a keen interest in people and the human experience in architecture. He endeavors to create designs that retain a humanistic touch in this increasingly detached world. With that framing, every piece of design created thereafter is carefully customized and crafted to resonate with the users. Park's architectural and interior pursuits have since garnered numerous architecture and design awards, earning him critical acclaim locally and internationally. So now that we heard all about him, Park, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juliana, for the very flattering introduction. Thank you, and welcome everyone. Nice that you listen in and taken an interest in our journey, my journey as architect. My name is Park, founder and principal of Park Associate Architects. I shall start my talk with my first awareness of design as a possible career path. And that was when I was back in my junior college years. I grew up in a small city in Malaysia, and in those times, there was no such thing as a career counselor and in schools. Hence, I knew very little about the possibilities in the universities. I had almost zero understanding about architecture as a course in the uni, and how I stumbled upon my first inclination towards design was during my A-level general paper examination. I've always been a very weak student in GP. Barely made it through the grades in my 2 years in JC. So during the actual A-level exam, I was, as usually, stumped, just staring at the choices of difficult topics that center around politics, economics, philosophy, and religion. And among the options, one odd topic stood out, is titled, How to Decorate Your Ideal Home. And that was the topic I wrote about. And when the result came back, I actually got a distinction for the first time in my whole JC career. And with that at the back of my mind, I discovered that architecture could be a course that I was be interested in, flipping through the prospectus of the university, NUS at the time. And here I am. I started architecture in NUS in 1985. I went on to do my part 2 in Bartlett School of Architecture and another year in Sheffield, eventually, that's where I graduated. I came back to Singapore after graduation, worked in the local practice. I went to China for a few years, and I came back to the same firm that I started with before actually starting Park Associates in 1999. So if you want to ask, have I always been an ambitious young architect with the burning desire to start my own practice? Well, the answer is actually no. And the reason why that happened was because my employer at the time, very successful architect, but he was diverting most of his focus and attention into development and investment, where it naturally made a lot more money, and neglecting the architectural practice. And I was beginning to feel quite disheartened about the whole process. And an offer come along for me to take on a house commission. And I figured I could survive on the fee for a year on my own, and without much planning or thinking or worrying about what's a pitfall. And I took the first step and started my own company. And it's actually worth mentioning that in the beginning of one's career, it's actually great to have friends to bounce ideas off and give each other a different perspective in work and life in general. In that regards, I had the good fortune to have met Colin, who is also speaking today, among others, in my formative years. Colin, who is also starting out about the same time as I did, if I'm not wrong. We've been good friends and counsel since. We even have that old photograph you see on screen now. That was me in my geeky 90s outfit. And of course, Colin already looking like Colin of today in the photo. With a lot of hard work over the years, the firm started to gain traction in the market, and we continued to grow and grow until year 2007. At the time, we had about 20 of us in office. That was when I entered one of the lowest point of my architectural journey. November 2007, for those who have been through it, that was when the global financial crisis hit. Well, for the younger folks, if you recall back when we were first encountered with the crisis of COVID pandemic in 2020, early 2020, the fear, the uncertainty, and the worries about what it could do to the economy, well, in 2007, they were multifold of what you felt. There were real deep fear, and the impact was real. It didn't go away like COVID this time. It stood there for a long time. It was very bad, and it was sudden. And within a month, almost all the project had to be literally suspended. And the suspension was so-called indefinite. We do not know when it's coming back. It was terrifying time. Survival was in question. Not to be overly dramatic, but at that darkest hour, when I knew that I would have difficulty paying my guys the subsequent month, I received a call from a friend who had the scope of work that he didn't know how to define. Then Singapore was building a major international theme park for the first time, and it was bankrolled, and the government was on its back, and it was the very few project that was running at the time. They gathered the best expertise from all over for the project. There was concept designer from the US, a Singapore architect, rights from the Netherlands, and the tracks for the rights from Belgium, and many other suppliers from all over the world. And they had a very capable installer who is very, very Japanese. Well, the problem they had was to how to get all of them on the same page. And that was the scope that they needed to fill. I put together a logical response, started on the project within the week. And thankfully, we completed Universal Studio Singapore in good time with cheers all over. And it was how a window was opened for me to a whole new field of work. So Park Associate entered the theme park industry. So beside architecture, we became a known name in the theme park business internationally. And we have completed projects all over the world, from Florida to Shanghai, from Tokyo to Dubai. And fast forward to 2013, there was another milestone year for us. We moved into our new office at Kim Yam Road. We conceived the office with a theme, anti-office. We wanted to redefine what a workspace could be, and it was very well received by the design industry. It was also where PDA acknowledged our achievement and awarded us the accolades Design of the Year. So these are shots of our current office as it stands. Around about 2017, we began to have small offices in Bangkok, Manila, China, and the US. We have completed many projects by now. I shall speak briefly on a few today. One of the highlights was completing Nanyang Girls High. It was not an easy project, but it was definitely worth it. We won the project via competition, and we actually disregard key aspects of the competition brief and ended up winning the project, possibly because we had disregarded the competition brief, I think. The design challenged many of MOE's conventions and preconception, and we had many conversations with them to try to convince them that it's okay or it's even good to think outside the box. And I think eventually they relented and let us do the project as it stood today. I think this sense of anti-establishment is something we believe in and encourage in office. After the project completed, we were invited back to Nanyang. In one of their assemblies, we were presented with a special gift from the student, which is this video. As you can tell from this video, it was a real labor of love by lots of hard work by the students.
Kick to the wall.
I can see but you when you dance. it. Got that good soul in my feet. I feel that hot blood in my body when it drops. Ooh, I can't take my eyes off of it. Moving so phenomenally. You're more like the way we rock it. So don't stop, stop, stop. Under the lights when everything goes. Nowhere to hide when I'm getting you close. When we move, well, you already know. So just imagine. Nothing I can see but you.
Well, you get the picture. The gratitude from the student and seeing how they enjoy the architecture until today is very moving. I have to admit that being surprised by the video in the assembly and watching it for the first time on stage was emotional, to say the least. And in this project, we challenged a local taboo against classroom being in the basement. It was a tough job convincing the ministry, but I think it turned out beautifully. And this is being a basement, and one can't tell that it's a basement classrooms. And the competition brief originally called for 2 blocks of 4-story building, and we thought it was brutal to kill the green, and we figured out a way to return the green to both the student as well as anybody driving along Daniel Road. And I think it turned out quite nicely. Another project was an interesting tile showroom we recently completed. I won't go through the design concept in too much detail, but I just want to share that we want it to be a place that opens the imagination for customers from all walks of life. And design should be accessible by everybody, not just the design professionals. And we wanted the showroom to go beyond a purely transactional setting. So I want it to be a place invigorating and memorable and empowering experience for everyone who visit the place. Houses, I shall end my talk on this note. While we have gone quite a bit since we started more than 20 years ago, but we still love designing houses because houses usually have more room for expression and exploration. That is for start. But more importantly, houses is a chance for us to forge new partnership with the owner over the years. And we have built many beautiful friendships in the process as well. So houses are not just a commodity where we are concerned. On this note, I shall hand it back to Juliana.
All right, thank you very much, Park. I especially love that little snippet you added in about how you won the project by challenging the project ask, as well as the relationships that you forged with all of your clients. So I imagine we might be seeing some questions regarding that in the Q&A segment later, but we'll see how it goes. Our very next speakers, we have architects Ong Kershing and Joshua Komarov from Lekker Architects. They're a group of designers and architects who are fascinated by the power of space to engage, create formative moments, to provide a stage for public life. So their interest does lie in projects with big ambitions, from buildings that provide inclusion, neighborhoods that encourage walking and socializing, to dreamlike retail experiences that are exciting and transformative. Ong Kershing is an architect and educator. She studied at Harvard College and Harvard Graduate School of Design, taking degrees in the fields of fine art, architecture, and landscape architecture. At the National University of Singapore Department of Architecture, she teaches design as an associate professor in practice and is the program director for the undergraduate Bachelor of Arts in Architecture program. For her work as an architect with Lekker, she was selected as one of URA's 20 under 45 in 2017. Joshua Komarov is a design consultant at Lekker Architects and an assistant professor in the Urban Studies program at Yale NUS College. He studied at Amherst College and Harvard Graduate School of Design, taking degrees in the fields of literature, architecture, and landscape architecture. In 2009, Joshua completed a PhD in cultural geography at University of California, Los Angeles, writing about haunted landscapes and urban memory in Singapore. So we'll now play the recording from Xing as well as Joshua.
Hi, we're Josh and Xing from Lekker Architects. Thanks to our friends at the PDA for inviting us to speak at this education and career webinar. So the prompt for today's session is beyond aesthetics. And the question here, we think, is not one of rejecting aesthetics. Everyone knows that design is an aesthetic practice. Rather, this asks, how can design go beyond primarily aesthetic or formal concerns to have a greater impact? That is, what makes a design relevant, impactful? Why does the public seem to care about one project and then not spend much time thinking about another? Josh and I think that there are several ways to answer this question, but we want to share one answer with you today based on the experience of our practice and projects. And this has to do with the user, the typical subject of design, the protagonist, and how they're assumed or imagined when we make things. And the message here is not to be user-centric. So much of design method, no matter how user-centric, assumes a normative experience. We assume tolerances for stimulation, legibility, and desire, but because we work for diverse publics, these assumptions are usually false. So for this reason, we can make our work relevant. We can go beyond aesthetics by simply expanding our definition of our users. And most importantly, try to understand the experience that they have through our design of environments, products, and communication. Now, this is not an easy thing to do, but it's worth doing. Because when the definition of the user changes, all of design changes.
Innovation happens without our even trying. New worlds emerge, and they emerge for all of us because there's another simple truth, which is that there is no typical user. This old workhorse assumption of design has always been wrong. Almost no one is physically or neurologically typical in some neutral sense. So we're going to show a few examples from our work where breakthroughs occurred and the work gained relevance based upon some new understandings of the user. Our friends at PDA asked us to talk today about how we began our careers in design. Actually, we began ours in the wrong way. We did this by doing the rightest thing that you can do. We did really well in school when we went to the Harvard Design School, right? And it's this mecca of design where you learn to make the most sophisticated work and study under the best architects in the world, et cetera, et cetera. And the last 20 years of our practice has been actually about unlearning what we learned there. Because what we learned there was that the design product, in our case, the building, is the protagonist of the design process. It's the end result, and its own embodied excellence will be self-evident. In fact, we now see design in a completely different way as a medium. Buildings are a medium. Landscape, products, graphics, these are all media. Architectural design is not the end goal for us these days. It's simply a device to embody social meanings, to respond to broader conditions, and to enable human potentials. And interestingly, this is how much of the public views design also. Aesthetics have in some ways become a huge social problem, and we would argue that social media and the internet have created a huge aesthetic fatigue. Right? And this is why the public have begun to understand design through concepts like cottagecore and dark academia. These speak to questions of who the user can be and how the design can enable their aspirations and values.
So in a sense, this is very similar to what we were trying to do at a project like this. This was Singapore's first inclusive school. Now, our time today here is short, so there's a lot of detail about this online, and I won't go into it too deeply. But the concept here was to try to do away with anything that was part of the traditional schoolroom as we know it. Why? This had to do with the students who attend this school. They hail from across the autism spectrum. This means that some are hypersensitive, meaning that the slightest visual or auditory stimuli in their environment are highly disturbing. But others are exactly the opposite, hyposensitive, meaning that they need intense stimuli to get going and to learn. Some are uncomfortable with doors and thresholds and enclosures, and others really need these to feel safe. For each, the experience of a design space is entirely different. So there's no typical autistic person. And at the same time, there are students with motor neurological issues and with visual and hearing impairments. So at the back of this room here, you can see tables, and these were required for licensing, but we simply pushed them to the back of the room. And this is because kids in wheelchairs can't use these tables. Instead, the room was imagined as what you see in the front here, a kind of campfire or storytelling circle. And the tent is here in case any of the kids feel overstimulated and need to limit their visual or spatial field to relax. And this is why we need to have a space that is really a whole set of telescoping spaces of different scales. So we wind up with little holes and nooks like this, and these are actually essential for certain kids to be able to occupy this room at all. And when we begin to do this, the furniture starts to become space making, and we get rooms within furniture within rooms. Some of the classrooms here are actually made using huge soft blocks. And this is so that the students, again, with all of their different and conflicting needs, can each day create the classroom that they feel most comfortable learning in. And what we see here is a really interesting principle that took us years to learn. No single space with a single design can be inclusive, because different users have conflicting needs. So one space must have the potential to be many and to change on the fly, sort of like a theater space, which you can see in this image, which can always be reconfigured. And we can see the same effect here. This is the library at the Canossian School, where many of the children have hearing disabilities. The wall is full of alcoves also, but you can also see this labyrinth across the floor. In here, the acoustic conditions are really different from the larger space. It's very much dampened, and it allows kids with hearing impairment to read comfortably. And what's interesting in this room again is that it becomes a kind of layering of different rooms. It's striated and not necessarily internally coherent. This is from the same project. What we find fascinating about this is that the needs of the inhabitants really force the environment to evolve into something new. A single room is not just one thing. It starts to have multiple overlapping and collage-like layers. And we start to see this wild profusion of different modes of communication. Everything from fridge magnet poetry to storytelling to shadow puppetry. The forms and functions of this space get really mashed up and complex. And the kind of creative chaos that is happening in the social layer as kids simply figure out how to get along in a way that doesn't leave anyone out. And left to their own devices, they will do that.
And then, in some cases, the way that the space is inhabited just radically changes. What you see here is the quiet room, a space at the National Museum for individuals and families with sensory processing issues. And people with these issues are just incredibly sensitive in a way that most of us aren't. The vibrations from HVAC systems will feel like the room is shaking. The background hum of architecture or the city around will be deafening and make it impossible to think. Surfaces will be way too tactile and stimulating. And in fact, very few spaces had been purpose designed for these folks until recently. Usually it was some back room or even a broom closet with carpeting up the walls. And this here is one of the first, and we're finishing now a larger one in Kazuo Sejima's Garage Museum in Moscow. And again, you can see that the requirement of this group transforms this design to have a space that's small, soft, acoustically separated from the building's mechanical systems. It's far more comfortable when it's curvilinear, and the space is carefully calibrated to diffuse a consistent color tone through indirect light. So different colors will help to dampen hypersensitivity or to energize the hyposensitive. And sometimes considering the needs of a specific user group may result in a project that does not involve designing spaces at all. When we started to look into how design for persons with dementia work, we realized that actually the more that one can maintain their existing familiar spaces, the better. And this is because sudden changes in routine and environment can speed up the progression of the disease. So the key challenge is how to support people with dementia and their carers as they continue to live at home. As their needs change, the furniture and their arrangements have to adapt also. So we proposed a series of hacks to IKEA furniture to support these needs. And this book of hacks and explanatory essays and interviews is available for download in its entirety at hackcare.org. So please do go and check it out if you're interested. Sometimes the designer may need to work for users that are not human at all. And this is something we need to think about in the time of climate change. This is a plant that we see often in the botanics or around Singapore. It's a heliconia. They aren't native, but they have been very popular here, and so they're super common. And in their native context, these are pollinated by hummingbirds. Hummingbirds pollinate while hovering. They beat their wings very quickly to stay in one place. But in Singapore, we have olive-backed sunbirds, which are close relatives of the hummingbird, but with an important difference. Sunbirds perch in order to pollinate, and the ecologist Richard Corlett has observed sunbirds in Singapore trying to pollinate heliconias, but they can't because they can't find a place to stand. And this tiny problem of bird ergonomics has a huge impact because it means that heliconias here cannot produce without human intervention, and this is hugely unsustainable. So in design research for ArcAsia, the Architects Regional Council of Asia, we attempted to make tiny biodegradable platforms for the heliconia that will allow sunbirds to perch and to pollinate without human help. It's a little bridge until some genetic adaptation makes these work a little bit better in our environment. Now, who's the user here? Is it the bird, the plant, the novel ecosystem that's emerging in Singapore as a result of human disturbance going back to colonial times? It's not clear, but what's obvious is that our approach to landscape design has to change in this context, and we're only able to make this leap when we think about this enigma of who or what the user is. Okay, so hopefully we've made this quick, simple point clear, and something that we'd like to point out just by way of closing is that, in fact, in popular forms of imagination, and we would call these design also, we've been making things for unusual users' needs for ages, and without making a big noise about it. It's largely been in professionalized design that we've shifted toward producing for a fictional typical user at an industrial scale. So as most of you will recognize, these are everyday things for ghosts, shoes, cars, architecture, etc. And the dead are perhaps an extreme example of the atypical user, but because there are strong traditional ideas of the afterlife, the design for these folks is very clearly understood. So we've dabbled a little bit in this area. Well, we were invited to do so by an art curator. And again, when we tried to think through what a home might be for a lineage of ancestors, the world changed. We wanted it to have a sense of history, hence it's a shop house. But in any family, there are more and more and more ancestors all the time. So this meant that an intergenerational home had to be huge, like an endlessly growing tower. Obviously, we didn't figure out how to design for the afterlife, and the result looks super odd. But what we came up against, again, is the simple but often ignored point that we're making today. In the practitioner's search for forms and solutions, there's an elusive fit between design products and users. And when understood in new and precise ways, this is powerful for carrying us beyond the aesthetic and into new worlds of making and thinking. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Xing and Joshua. I hope you enjoyed their sharing as much as I did. So that truly brought about a lot of insight regarding design of spaces or design of products to promote inclusivity for people on this earth or even beyond. So also speaking today, last but not least, we have Colin Seah, founder director of Ministry of Design. So he is architecturally trained in the US and licensed in Singapore. Colin honed his sensibilities working for the likes of Rem Koolhaas and Daniel Libeskind. He also spent 4 years at the National University of Singapore's Department of Architecture, researching design pedagogy and serving as a design critic. As Ministry of Design's founder and director of design, Colin has been named Designer of the Year by International Design Awards USA 2010. He is also a 3-time grand prize winner of the Gold Key Award, the highest international hospitality accolade. He is named Hong Kong's Perspectives 40 Under 40 Architects, Marcus Cooperation Foundation Prize 2007 Emerging Architect with Potential for Greatness, and recognized as Rising Star in Architecture by Monocle. Colin has been a juror for the inaugural DZine Awards, a global advisor for leading surfaces manufacturer Constantino, and invited by the Singapore Tourism Board to redefine Singapore as a destination for 2020 and beyond. That is a whole lot of awards and accolades. So Colin, now that we've heard all about you, the time is yours.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. And also a huge shout out to our good friends Park and also Josh and Xing, fellow allies and so generous in this design world. It's really great to have friends like you guys, especially when things get tough, and knock back a beer or two when things are going well. So today I would love to share with you my little trajectory into the design world, and also just one project. It's not a PDA winner, but we hope one day it will be. The firm's called Ministry of Design, a little bit sort of tongue-in-cheek. We live in Singapore where there's a ministry for everything, so we thought, why not call it Ministry of Design? And when we call some clients, the secretaries will pick up the phone and get a bit of a scare because they think that maybe they have done something wrong. The Ministry of Design is calling, is my building the wrong color or something? So there's that. And also, I think I intentionally named it to represent a group of people, not just one voice. But the group of people who are now Ministry of Design are made up of a lot of talented individuals. Much of them, like you guys in the audience out there, they once were students, they are now professionals, but all of them very passionate like you are about design. And also the other reason we called it Ministry of Design is because I think design is a gift that some of us have been given, and is a way to minister and to make the world a better place through design. My journey to design was not at all intentional. I never dreamt of being an architect or designer. I didn't really have any influences in my life or people who steered me that way. And I think I was only exposed to creative gestures which were more bite-sized, like, picking up a camera. I had dreams of being a photographer. In fact, I did do quite a bit of photography for fashion designer, as well as architectural photography. And also I did theater directing, but none of those things really kind of satisfied the same way, which I was looking for in a discipline which I hadn't actually been able to sort of picture in my mind yet. But one day there was this sort of epiphany that architecture should be it. And some of you may just chance upon that as well. One day you'll wake up and go, this is the thing for me. That's what happened. And I spent 5 years in architecture school abroad and did multiple internships and spent quite a number of years teaching in NUS. And all of this was good foundation to creating Ministry of Design, which has been 18 years in the making now, together with about 30 of my colleagues over 3 offices. And it's been a lovely, difficult, challenging, but very rewarding journey as well. The thing which underpins our work is not so much a style or an aesthetic, but it's really an attitude or a mindset. And if we were to sort of summarize it very simply in a graphic, it would be to question, to disturb, and redefine. And what on earth does that mean? And really the attitude resonated and was germinated when we began to realize that a lot of the clients we were having and projects we were having all had very starting points where the mindset was rooted in convention. And I think we needed to sort of uproot ourselves from the things that have gone before us. I mean, convention obviously is important and has relevance because it works and it has worked for a while now. But with the changing times and culture, we recognize that what used to be relevant may not be relevant tomorrow. So today's relevance needs to be questioned for tomorrow's application. So we like to always challenge convention in whatever level. Sometimes the projects allow us to ask very deep and fundamental questions. Other times it's downstream and it takes on smaller forms, but not any less meaningful. And then through that attitude of always wanting to question, we then disturb convention through a lot of, rigorous, thoughtful, innovative work, where we iterate design to refine it and get it better. And then hopefully we come up with something that's redefined. So I'd like to give you an example of a project which has done, we feel, just that. And it's for the client Citibank. And it was a competition which we were invited to. And we had never done any work in this particular genre, which fascinated us because in a way, it gave us an edge with no preconceptions in mind. And it's a wealth hub, the largest in the world for Citibank, and it's situated in Singapore, right beside the Apple Store. And the conventions that we're trying to question were basically, there are quite a few, but in summary, there are 3 main ones. What is the nature of contemporary luxury, especially when it comes to, wealth management and a clientele that's very used to incredibly beautiful and expensive things? How do we celebrate the site and its challenges? It was a very difficult, unusual site. And then is the gap between the front of house where the clients are met and the back of house where the relationship managers and staff who service the clients work. There's usually a huge gap between these two. Is it bridgeable? And can the people working behind the stage and in the front of the stage be really treated the same way? So the first question, what is the nature of contemporary luxury? Can it be, especially in the banking scenario, more than just like boring chandeliers and marble? The site was very challenging. There was this huge glass atrium space, very hard to make actual space and meeting rooms inside it. So that was one of the huge challenges. And then the back of house spaces are usually horrible cubicles. How do we make it and move it beyond fluorescent light and this with the same kind of budgets and not burst the budget for the project? So the solution, let me walk you through it now. So that's the building from across the street, and you see it takes up 4 floors of the upper levels, and you can see that big glass atrium there. There are 2 main public levels, one for one layer of kind of private banking client, and then another one for a higher tier. So when you first arrive, there's this sense of containment, organic flow that guides you naturally through and into the space beyond. And in anticipation of this, usually you have in your mind already a particular experience, but then when you walk through this very interior-like space, you actually emerge and come out into this sort of garden where there's this poetic balance between something that's very lush and primal with the kind of tropicality that represents Singapore, together with this very careful, chiseled, choreographed planter boxes, which lead you through the space very organically. And we chose this attitude to take because, firstly, we felt that the green was an incredible symbol, a new symbol for how wealth could be manifested. It's sustainable, it's responsible, it's done in ways which doesn't harm others and the environment around it. And we thought this is an appropriate and relevant new symbol for wealth. We wanted to create this environment, not just because it was nice and because Singapore is a city in the garden, but because it stands for something greater than itself. And we hope that that would sort of set the tone for the discussions that would happen. There are these meeting pods, which are self-sustained rooms with air conditioning, AV, sound systems, soundproofing, and you can have meetings there in private, and the clients love to meet in here. You feel like you're secure and have a lot of privacy, but you're also deep inside the space, and you can look at the garden around you. The space really transforms at night, and it becomes a lot more sort of moody and dramatic. And there are lots of events here held for the clients at night. The spaces can be transformed into cocktail event spaces. And one of the other innovations was having a bar in the center of a wealth management hub, which almost never happens. It's much more lifestyle driven in this case. And the clients were very open to these ideas and embraced them. And as we move through the layers, the upper layers for another tier of private wealth client, even higher one, and the scale changes, it's more intimate. The spaces are for 2 to 3 rather than larger groups. The detailing is slightly more articulated and intricate, and all of the care represented allows you also to sort of build this sense of anticipation as you look down into the garden spaces below. And we fondly call this sort of the envy corner. We knew psychologically that the people below would aspire to become clientele members of the space above, and this was a way to sort of like trumpet that you have arrived by standing at this corner and looking down below. So moving through the rest of the space, just assortment of seating and meeting areas. And also I just want to quickly show you how we bridge the gap between what you see now as the front of house spaces and the next slide showing the back of house spaces. And there's this almost seamless translation, although the material palette and budget for this was, you know, not even close to the front of house spaces. The entire vibe, feeling with the botanical aspects, the openness, the variety of seating really just translates and makes the person working at this facility not feel like what they do behind the scenes is any less important than when they're upfront serving the customers. I just want to end with showing you that beyond the glitz and the finished product, there are lots of challenges. This project faced many. One of them was the very complex detailing of the pods and the planters. And the pods were themselves mini buildings, almost like architecture, with structure, with mechanical and engineering systems all integrated. It's just a room, a single room, like a ute or like a tent. But it's a fully functioning, self-supporting building, and it took a lot of detailing to figure out. Also, the complexity of how to make sure the plants were designed to be easily changed out, to not look like they were in pots, but to look seamless. How the planters had to have fixed modules so that we didn't run into too much complexity with too much variety. How each species had to be perfectly suited for the conditions that we had inside this space. And also, we had to do all kinds of inspections, even for the plant arrangements. And all of this happened, as you can see, during COVID. And it was incredibly challenging because the construction was super fast-tracked, and also material supplies and contractors had to be managed in spite of all the restrictions. So this was an amazing feat. And it wasn't just the designers and the clients, obviously, a whole bunch of people. And this, I just wanted to show, especially for the students, just to give you an impression, when you join the profession as a designer, you're not working alone. You're working with all kinds of other consultants, acoustic consultants, lighting consultants, engineering consultants, people who measure the sustainability of your project. You work with a whole bunch of builders who are super skilled. You'll learn so much from them, more than you will learn in school sometimes. And then you also work with a whole bunch of suppliers, and you can see the never-ending list of people that we work with. And this is just a sample set of them. So it's really quite amazing. And of course, you have brilliant photographers who also capture your project's images. And all of this, I think, comes from inspiration from above, because all of us are gifted in particular ways, and we're just very thankful as designers to have been gifted in this particular way. So with that, I thank you and hand the time back.
Thank you very much, Colin, for sharing about the City Wealth Hub. It was truly inspiring to hear about some of the thought process behind the design of the space. And it's also very nice to explore the space through your photos as well, since I'm clearly not in that high net worth clientele group yet, yeah? And right now it is time for our Q&A session. So for that, I'm going to pass the task over to our moderator for today. We have Zhijie. So for those of you who would like to ask our panel of speakers today any questions regarding maybe their presentation or anything really regarding spatial and interior design, please feel free to click on the Q&A tab below to submit your questions, and our speakers will try their very best to try and answer them in the session later on. But for now, I have a little introduction about our moderator. We have Zhijie, who is an experienced lecturer with a decade of experience working in design and design education. He is currently leading a dynamic team of educators at Singapore Polytechnic to inspire, nurture, and to grow future spatial designers. He is trained in Singapore and the United Kingdom, and he is an office bearer with the Society of Interior Designers Singapore. He is an accredited interior designer of the Singapore Interior Design Accreditation Scheme as well, plus a chartered member of the Royal Town Planning Institute in the UK. So with that, we'd like to welcome Zhijie, Colin, and Park.
Thank you so much, Juliana. So my name is Zhijie. A big thank you to TSG for having me, as well as have our speakers join us today. I think it's a real privilege, especially for the students, to really hear about the journeys that our designers go through. I think a lot of people see the end result, right? And they see, oh, these are PDA winners. But I think it's very heartening to hear all four speakers today talk about their journey. What are some of the challenges, right? And then Colin was also talking about constraints, which people don't see, right? We see the beautiful pictures and we think, it's an easy job to get it done. Really, thank you. And I think so far we've heard really a lot about the dialogue between our designers, right? In terms of their work, their process, the vision and the outcomes. So I think that's very rich and something that we don't normally get access to. So let's, in view of time, let's move forward. And I thank DSG again for making my life a bit easier with the poll. And we know who is, what the tribe has spoken and what they want. So feel free to add whatever questions that you have and put it in the chat group. Maybe we can start off first. Interestingly, all our four speakers today are all architecturally trained. And then we heard about the transition from, for example, for Colin, right? It began not even in spatial, it was photography, you've got stage, and then you move into spatial. And maybe the question I can put forth is, what are some of the strengths and pitfalls of coming from an architectural understanding of space? So first part, and maybe the second part, which our audience is interested about, is there a difference between spatial design and interior design, right? So maybe you want to tap your brains on this. So two parts. The first, are there strengths and pitfalls of coming from an architectural background, doing interior design, spatial design? And is there any difference to you in terms of spatial design and interior design? Yeah, so over to Park and Colin. anyone wants to start off first?
Colin?
You seem nodding quite a bit, so maybe if Colin, if you'd like to share some of your thoughts about your background.
I'm like the little figure on the dashboard of a car, just nodding a lot. I think actually the question is phrased in a very interesting way. Are there any drawbacks? It seems like there's already a bias integrated into the inherent in the question. I would say actually the opposite. It has been said that architecture is really the mother of design, and however you interpret it, it seems to suggest that architecture and the way one thinks about problem solving or the process of creation in architecture is something that is so fundamental and upstream that it can also apply, govern, control, or influence the other mediums which we all know to be also creative outlets, like interior design, for instance, spatial design, product design, even branding. And I've generally approached my training as an architect as a foundation course, like a very long foundation course, but it's been a foundation course into the building blocks for establishing a way to see the world and to tackle the issues which you might encounter when you design almost anything. And we've had the privilege, and I think part two, and I know Josh and Xing for sure, they showed a book and they showed products, and they obviously do architecture as well as space. We've also had the privilege of working multidisciplinarily. And I found that my architecture training allows me to almost hold in tension quite a number of different aspects of design and deal with them in a thoughtful, intelligent way. So I think to begin with, it's a big leg up, but does it mean that everyone needs to have that kind of background to handle spatial design well? The answer is no, because in a way, spatial design, even more so than architecture, I feel is a balance between the cerebral kind of part of your mind and the sort of sensory, more phenomenological part of your being. Meaning, it's not just about solving a problem rationally. It's about also how something really makes you feel and how you emote, and the experience that you are enveloped in is very critical. And sometimes I think maybe architects don't do that as well, because a lot of what we do almost has to be dealt with in with such precision, and also in accordance to regulations which are so overwhelming at times. I think Park is much more of an expert in that regard than I am, and sometimes these constraints may be at the expense of the purity of maybe celebrating an experience in a very visceral way.
Thanks so much for that. Maybe Park, any thoughts about what Colin said?
I agree.
And your own journey in terms of what are your thoughts about coming from an architectural background in relation to spatial design?
Well, I think if you're asking a larger question, whether architectural degree is a prerequisite for success in design field, then surely it's not. Where spatial design, again, when we're talking about the following question was the difference between spatial design, interior design. So there are many layers to the whole industry and many layers to the process, and there are huge volume of projects that do not allow intervention in the spatial design, that the society need people to serve that aspect as well. And due to budget, due to space constraint, even down to the simplest living space that is bare and you just need to dress it up. And that is when you go to a different spectrum of interior design versus how it evolved into interior spatial design or into interior architecture design or architectural design, whichever. So I think if one is concerned about being in the design field without architectural degree, are you handicapped? No. I think the volume of work is huge, and we need all sorts of people to take care of different aspects of the whole industry. Yeah. Having an architectural degree surely open a certain aspect of the business that without which you can't get in, namely architecture. That's one. And also the knowledge to deal with a bit more complex brief where you need to touch the structure, you need to touch the mechanical, and you need to shift things around. Having architectural training, that helps. Yeah. And then of course the difference between spatial design, is it a new meaningful tagline to it? I don't think it's meaningless tagline to it. No, I don't think it's meaningless. I think it sort of gave a different understanding to what interior design does beside decorating the surfaces. So it does have real meaning behind trying to call it a different name, spatial design.
Just to add to Park's point, one thing I've enjoyed doing spatial design-wise, which I feel originates from my training to see things at a fundamental level, is to be able to challenge the way we conventionally understand space. So I mean, the fancy term for it is typology, right? And we all have archetypes or typologies in our minds about a lot of things. Like for instance, it's not just about design, it's about, let's say, relationships. If you go on a date, should a guy pay, should a girl pay? You do open the door. I mean, like all these archetypes of like what conventional behavior should be like is constantly called into question, right? As we are evolving as a culture. And we type at the spatial level, what I find helpful when you begin to understand it at that level is that the spatial designer has a role and can play the, can diagnose what at that particular moment in time, let's say today, you're designing for a particular client in a particular place, what the most appropriate and relevant response is, and whether the existing types or archetypes or typologies are able to satisfy that need. And if not, that's where the fun begins. That's when you can sort of shift or metamorphosize or evolve what exists, or you can remake completely what exists, especially when things aren't good enough. Like I don't know about Park, and I suspect it's true for him too, but what drives me a lot is that I'm just never satisfied with a lot of the things that I come across. And inherently, I always say, man, this can be better. Maybe I don't always know why or how, but there's this innate criticality, not in a negative way, but in a very constructive way, that the world around us and the things that we do can be done better, they can be experienced better, they can be managed better, our experiences of them, whether it's the home, which you spend a lot of time in, or the office, or the school, or the restaurant, or wherever you find yourself, right? So in a way, I think the notion of spatial designer, if you really wanted to dig to the heart of it, I would really say, hey, think of yourself as an experiential designer. Like what is the best experience you're trying to create? And space and architecture and product and everything else, acoustics and music, are just tools that you employ to enable yourself to create the best experience possible. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think we see, Park was early on talking about the architect, the interior designer, the stylist. We put labels and we try to understand the roles or the supposed role that you're supposed to be. But what I hear is that, through the platform of architecture, just like Park was talking about this GP paper, and how there's this critical thinking, there's this dialogue, right? And how you approach the project. I think today we've seen through all four of the designers, it's really questioning the brief, right? So like for Park, you're talking about the empty office, you've got classroom in the basement. Colin, yourself, you're also talking about, must the back of house be like a factory, right? And then how do we extend the experience for the customer into the back of house for our people as well? And if you look at Josh and Xing, they're designing this intervention for the sunbird, right? And really how the role of the designer is not just typical, but really understanding the brief and moving it forward. So
I would like to say that
yes.
Park's project, that the school should have won more awards than it has, because it's a brilliant project, that one. And I think that designing, like what he has done and what Xing and Josh have done, designing educational facilities is one of the most meaningful things you can do, because when you change someone's mindset at a young early stage in their development, where they are young and fertile and can be sort of like shaped, right? It's much more impactful in creating an adult who sees the world differently and who can question in a constructive way the world, rather than trying to teach, someone who's already gone through 20, 30 years of their life. So I think educational spaces are one of the most important spaces to design, to be honest.
And I think it has the most regulations as well. We don't see it, but I'm sure there are a lot of behind the scenes elements to comply and work with.
Yeah, because there are preconceptions of what is good and what
Classroom
isn't.
should be, right?
Yeah.
So
surely you need conventions, but that needs to be constantly provoked and discussions about it held, right? As long as there's that openness to do that, conventions as a starting point is nothing wrong. I really cannot stand it when designers say, when asked, why did you do that? And then the designer goes, because I wanted to be different, law. I think that's ridiculous, because being different and having novelty is meaningless. It's only meaningful when the convention needs to be revisited. There are many good conventions that work, and you should not change it, right? Yeah, but there's so many.
They were there for a reason to begin with. Yeah. Yes, Pam.
On the same note, I also get upset when the guys tell me, ask them, why are you doing this? They say, because the regulation dictates it, without questioning how to reinterpret it. So it's just knowing how to push the boundary for good reason.
Yes.
And not stay within, and not doing it just to be different,
Yes. I mean, to your point, Pat, it's about trying to distill what the regulation's intention is, right? Is it human safety? Is it to allow for shading? Is it to allow for something? And can you achieve that goal through another means? That's really, what we should be doing. But of course, there are so many of these. It's hard to do that for everything.
Like you mentioned, there's just a lot of constraints, right? And I mean, it also echoes what we're saying here, also echoes what Josh and Xing were talking about, that there's no typical user, and then how we try to fit, right? The solution won't be a one solution fits all. Yeah.
In fact, I think that's interesting, because we don't, as much as Park does, we don't design for unique end users as much. I mean, our designs typically are more for an imagined user, right? Let's say a hotel or a commercial project. Whereas when you have the privilege of doing it for a specific person, then really that mantra of there is no typical user, it can be called into play, because then you can design for someone and their eccentricities and their preferences, not so much their tastes, right, but their habits and their rituals and their lifestyles, and how can you design a space that's perfect for that unique individual. So yeah, it is true, when you can afford to do it, it's the only way to go.
So a good point you talk about is being able to afford doing this. And because you all have years of experience and you've been on this journey with many different projects and all, maybe any thoughts for our students who are out there in the audience? How can they come to terms with this, right? Because here we're talking about a dialogue, you're pushing certain agendas with enlightened clients. But for our current students, what do you think can better prepare them to look forward to such outlook, or being able to practice this later on in their career? But any tips upfront, what should they be doing to prepare themselves for their next stage when they graduate?
I think having a point of view is incredibly important. And it sounds like an obvious thing, but I think when you drill down deep, not many of us have very clear points of view on things, or more importantly, I mean, you kind of have a point of view on everything, because you haven't had the time to encounter and process and reflect, right? But how do you ensure that the students of today have the ability and tools at their disposal to form form points of view. Because without a point of view, without an internal compass, then you are guided by everything else external, you know, like the rules that exist, or the conventions that exist, or the opinions that exist, or the trends that exist, or, you know, what social media is telling you. I think if we had a whole generation of students who have the ability to form points of view, and that those points of view obviously grounded in compassion and a sense of it's not a self-driven point of view. It's a point of view that manages to exist in harmony with the community around them. Then you're not just creating better designers, but you're creating better everything. You're creating better consumers. I mean, if you have better clients and patrons and government authority figures, all of this adds and contributes towards a happy ecosystem. It would be the most frustrating if you had talented designers, but incredibly dim clients or incredibly obstinate authority figures, because, you know, it's a multifaceted cycle that requires so many parties to mind meld and ask difficult questions together and seek solutions together for the best projects lah. Really, I mean, the project that Park showed, impossible without an open client, right? The project I showed, impossible without a client who inherently wanted to have something new and innovative and relevant for today, rather than sick of the same old, right? So inherently, those clients are already geared. Either they had to be steered, or they were already geared to be receptive to this. Without which, I think, you know, all our talent is, unless you're independently wealthy and can fund your own projects, you know,
You're your own client, right? That's when there's no resistance. Maybe on that point, thank you so much for that. And maybe practically, could you share with us, how did either Park or Colin yourself, how did you overcome the client's notion, right? Because you have these constraints. And then we have a question here, you know, how do designers validate their concepts before implementing them? So maybe for the projects that you've shown, if you could share with us, what were some of your, what did you do to convince the client or overcome that sort of stereotype of what a classroom or office should be?
Well, I think something that we often forget, young designers, is validating concept. It could be as simple using a masking tape, tapping out the dimension of the floor, standing in the box and see how it feels like. Of course, on a bigger scale, of course, models and even full-scale mock-up models are all method. But Colin correctly pointed out, the stars has to be aligned for a truly great project to happen. But I think it doesn't happen by chance, or rather the chance could be help if you embark on the right track of your career earlier. That, for example, as a firm, if you had go in the right direction, you had the right aspiration, you a bit more selective and push yourself a little harder, the product that come out will show itself, and you attract that, more likely to attract that kind of client eventually, who look to you to give you more space or not. And it makes your life easier to try to convince a client for what you're trying to do, having done something incrementally better over the years.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It takes a commitment to a certain philosophy and ethos. And if let's say money making was your bottom line, okay, firstly, as business owners, right, Park and myself will readily tell you that there are multiple bottom lines that we constantly have to uphold, because money is not the only bottom line. Work-life balance and how we care for our staff is another bottom line. The quality of our work and the outcomes that it generates is also another bottom line, right? So it's multiple bottom lines. So he's absolutely right in saying that if you don't make a commitment early to saying, I will sacrifice A for B because B is more important. If you don't do that, then you will just be jostled by the win per se. Like whatever life brings you or whatever life throws at you, and you won't filter it because you're not conscious, you see, you're not sentient. You don't have the point of view that we were talking about. You don't have that. So you'll just be like, just reactive, reactive. You know, if you're lucky, yeah. If you're not, then you just, so then, but that's different. It's not like everyone needs to have that. It's fine if you don't, but what we're saying is if you want to generate work that is eventually meaningful on these multiple levels and is relevant and it changes the way maybe people live and experience certain key things in their life, then you have to do it. And it's a long journey, isn't it, Park? I mean, it takes decades to do.
So I'm curious, when did your point of view develop? When was the inkling or that moment of the point of view? Was it in school? Was it, like Park, was it because you started your own firm and then some of the things you saw certain patterns in the works that you were doing? Because I think point of view, was there a eureka moment or was there patterns that you started to identify? Yeah. In your own journey, yeah.
For me, you need to start working and you try to look back as often as possible to try to rechart where you have been and if things had been in the right direction. Colin is talking about not being able to have a point of view too early. And I'll add that you need to develop that by being very open to all sorts of bombardment of information, but at the same time, be selective in actually what gets to become your core of your designer principle and not just absorbing everything. I just go with whatever you hear, of course. For me, when we had the real focus, that was again during the financial crisis. So we were very busy. We were doing very well since 1999 to 2007. But when the crisis hit, I realized that within a few months, all our reserve had run dry and the firm would have been closed if not for that savior of a project. And we tried to imagine that, how could we be successful for so many years and yet it wouldn't survive one crisis? So we started to question on whether were we doing things the right way, and were we catering to the right kind of product? Were we workflow, and how do we position ourselves? And do we go for volume instead of going for value? And this is when we realized that, okay, design with depth and intention and design with thoughts, those are the things that will bring you projects that will cruise you through in the worst of time.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Colin, any thoughts about your own journey? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll get circle around to that in a sec, but just to riff off what Park's saying, I mean, there's a certain sense of pragmatism that a business owner who isn't born with a golden spoon in your mouth has to undertake. And although we have shown you the best of our work, there are also, I mean, at least from our point of view, there are projects where we have strived to do things and we haven't maybe necessarily achieved them, but we've had to do them anyway because they were a means to a long-term end. There were steps that were to be taken necessarily, which built us up in terms of resilience, it built us up in terms of experience, but maybe it didn't build us up in terms of like award-winning projects, or maybe it didn't build us up in the kind of like flashy media-ready projects. But it made us more well-rounded. It gave us skill-building opportunities, etc. So nothing is like a good chef in the kitchen. No ingredient is wasted. Everything goes into making something. Maybe you don't see it as the star of the dish, but it's there somewhere. For myself, I think it's a bit of nurture and a bit of nature. So I remember two like influential people in my life. So the nature bit is, I think by nature, there is an inherent, very strong spatial, creative spirit that I see in my father. Although he was an engineer, he didn't really have a chance to express it, but it was very inherent in him. And I think, it's sort of genetic in some degree. But what unlocked it was meeting a few people. So one of them was my sister she is a very creative person, and she's older than me also, and the things she exposed me to really helped. And there's also another couple who, one was a photographer then, and another was a fashion editor, who really unlocked a whole world of non-mainstream creative outlets for me in terms of alternative movies, literature, music, and none of them were spatial, but they were all influenced the way I saw the world and filtered the world. And then I realized that through that, I began to see that what the previous exposure I had to things, when I returned to those things, I realized I was not happy with them anymore. I realized that there was an elevated sensitivity and an elevated sensibility towards things. And there was this constant, no, it can be better, things can be better, things can be more on point, or things can have more essence, or distilled to mean more. And I think this was really because of some of these key influences. Then, of course, along the way, educationally, I had a few amazing professors, two in particular. One was also a Harvard grad, and she was super influential in making me see design through the different scales. And then another was, an architect who was old enough to work with Walter Gropius. And okay, maybe a few of us will understand that reference, but Walter Gropius is one of the great modernists, and my professor worked with him and was incredibly insightful. So they were, along the way, to our audience out there, whether you are established like Park is, or whether you are a newbie and you're just starting your career, you really need to be incredibly open and curious, and to gravitate towards people who can influence you this particular way. And I think the reason why they took to me, those key influences in my life, was because I possess this sense of, I want to learn. I'm just very hungry, and I'm just innately curious about things. They were not going to reach out if they didn't see someone who was willing to soak up all they had to give and offer, I think. So I think you avail yourself to these influences, and you need to keep yourself sort of very open to them as well. And it's a two-way street. And without those, you can't grow. And maybe the struggle is in our older age, developmentally, it's hard to find those mentors. But I still find people I speak with, even peers who do different things from me, very inspiring.
Thank you so much.
I do have to add that this process is tiring. It's a lot easier to just cruise with it.
Yes. Yeah.
Then you just try to see how you can gain joy out of this so-called tiring process. Like one would constantly go to gym to push oneself and get runner's high and stuff. So if you feel that learning is tiring, but have got a high when you learn and when you change your mind and you have to form a certain perspective and let that be what drives you, then that could be the energy that you burn getting there.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the keywords I'm really hearing is about process and growing, right? And I think a lot of our students these days, they want to strive and achieve, but maybe a bit impatient, and they want it now. So I think my key takeaway is really putting myself in the driver's seat, right? So being aware, being open, and having control, and being reflective, so to move forward. Because I think some of the questions are looking at very technical things, like what software, what will make my portfolio look better. But I think Colin has shared, about point of view, the critical thinking, being able to then understand your own journey, and then pinpointing or picking up some of these similarities, and having an alternate point of view, so that when you approach a project, it's really something that it fits the needs, and it fits the needs and it's meaningful, as opposed to just making something pretty or something different for the sake of shocking people. Yeah, I think that's great. Maybe let's move on, because the tribe has spoken and I'm just mindful of time. Maybe let's move on to maybe a question that the professionals would like some input from. And let's move on to the notion about sustainability and designing for the future. And we all heard about there are many constraints, many things that are tugging at each project. So maybe if you could share with us what are some of maybe your tips you have about juggling the various needs, but including sustainable elements in. And so that's one. And maybe how meaningful do you think this sustainability element in view of climate change? Yeah, because interior is one part, right? Or spatial design is just one part. Do you think what you're doing is enough to make that change as well? Yeah, so maybe some thoughts about that. So first off, any tips about how do you approach sustainability or include sustainable aspects in your design? And then second, any thoughts about that in relation to the bigger scale of the interior, and then you've got the architecture, and then you've got the whole urban precinct and all. Yeah, any thoughts and any tips on that? Yeah.
Maybe I'd like to answer the second question first, because
Sure.
I think the first one's a bit downstream. But maybe the second one sheds more light. This is kind of controversial to say, because it's a bit like biting the hand that feeds. But I feel that sustainability inherently is through the reduction of consumption and constant change and discarding and renewing. Because it has been built into our psyche, especially the last maybe decade and a half of constant renewal through making things inherently irrelevant, or through poor and sort of mediocre quality products or experiences on the whole. So in other words, sustainability, I feel, comes through things which are much more purposefully designed for long-term usage, rather than disposability and renewal all the time. And what does that mean? I mean, it doesn't mean that we have less work to do, but it means that the work we do needs to be much better and much better considered. So instead of like being paid X amount to do, let's say, being paid $1 to do 10 jobs, we really should be paid $5 to do 2 jobs, and make those 2 jobs, even if it takes much longer to accomplish, last 5 times longer. And that, to me, is the nature of true sustainability, because it's almost paying lip service to sustainability if you have the same amount of consumption, even if you use better. Yes, of course, we need to use things that are more sensitively sourced and are more sustainable inherently, but it's the quantum of what we are consuming that is the issue, and how fast we are churning through it all. Because a lot of the stuff we design these days is designed to be sort of disposed and replaced, right? A lot of our products. I mean, why do we need a new phone every 2 years? It's ridiculous. What new offering does it really give you? Right? Same to do with renovation of homes, same to do with architecture, same to do with fashion. Fashions are almost the worst, culprit of that. So it's very inherent in our mindsets, right? So I think if we design things that really were designed to last, right, and possess quality, true quality, like through materials, through thoughtful design, through very well considered implementation and craft. And those things, because they're so sayang, they're so well done, you don't go and tear down a masterpiece. You don't like say, let's just throw this away, because it's a masterpiece, it's an heirloom. And that's, I think that would be truly much more sustainable, along with the other measures that we take for the renewal that we need to do. I'm not saying renewal is not important, but it needs to be much more measured.
Park, any thoughts on sustainability or what Colin shared?
Yeah, I think the question of whether are we doing enough, there's no measurement to it, and I think this lifestyle and this whole attitude towards what is wasteful and what is not is something that have to evolve over time. It's not a matter of campaign, and therefore whether how much campaign do we do, are we doing enough campaign of it? And I think we are going along the right track. there will be implementation that will look back and realize that that was the worst thing to have done for sustainability, even though that was done in the name of sustainability, for example. I'm a bit skeptical with some of the specific prescription because they are probably driven by a lot of lobbyists who have got the bottom line to try to support plastic, for example. For some time, they were the best thing in the world because there are multiple usage of a certain wasted material. And because then they will try to push the volume up by suggesting it to be thrown away each time, And again, that is for the profit driven. But if you go back to how it originally started, I think it was good. It was using wasted material to do something that could last a long time and to be reused over and over again. So I think we try get the attitude right and let it grow through the generation, but it's nothing to be measured now.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think in terms of there are always different benchmarks, right? What was seen as a good effort 10 years ago, maybe now it's seen as not enough and all. And I really like the point that Colin was talking about how it's a holistic solution. I think even in school, we are teaching ways to be sustainable. There are frameworks that we assess our buildings and interiors to say that it's sustainable. But I think if you talk about the role of the designer, we talk about lasting design, right? We talk about it's considered, it's user-friendly, how do people use it, caters to people's needs. And I like the idea that Colin talked about and how it's valued, right? You talk about the heirloom, it's value. And, nowadays, you talk about fashion, this shirt, okay, I've worn a few times, it's a bit out of shape, throw, right? And what is the value that you have to that? And I think everything around us, there is a designer. Someone had gone through to think about how people use it, how it's manufactured, how people experience it. But really, it also depends on how we value it, right? Our own personal values and how we attach to it before we actually follow up with whatever actions to throw, to keep, to reuse, to recycle. So I really like that notion and idea about the role of the designer, how the designer has that outlook and it's a holistic one. And I guess it's that holistic outlook that really juggles and comes to terms with all of these different aspects so that the outcome, not only is it usable, not only does it cater to different users and their needs, but it's also something that's valued because it's truly something that people really enjoy using, that's something that they experience.
Yeah. And it's an heirloom not because of the sentimentality of it, but because of its inherent worth, you see.
Yes.
So when I say heirloom, I obviously mean it in sort of a figurative way, not a literal way. But I think it would be hard pressed for you take a magazine that you read once and then you throw away. But if I give you a leather bound book with beautiful
stitches,
psychology and stitches, you're not going to you're going to think 3 times before you throw that away, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to translate into expensive things. Like obviously, not all of us can afford the equivalent of a leather book to live in, right? But still, even with materials that are sustainable and inexpensive, you can craft a space that is very, very valuable, not through expense in terms of materials, but value of the idea and the experience living in it. So yeah, I do think in the long term, if we are to survive for another millennium, and our great-grandchildren are to enjoy a world that we enjoy today, then we will not so much have to enjoy less or live less well, but we just have to live more well over a long period of time versus very short snippets of fleeting sort of gestures that we dispose of so quickly.
Yes, I think the key takeaway for me is that think of it in terms of the long game, be it as a student, be it as a designer, and whatever we build and construct, it has a life of its own and goes beyond us, right? Hopefully for the built projects. And I think the other important word that I picked up and keeps resonating with me is earlier you talked about that having empathy. And I'm sure Josh and Xing, some of their projects, it's very niche and unique part of society that they cater to, right? And those, I'm sure, not only the users, but even the parents of the children, they would really value those spaces because it's so rare and so few in between as well, right? Yeah, so I really learned a lot today. I really want to thank Colin and Park for the sharing. And so I think due to time, I think we'll end off here, but I understand there are a few other questions. But what we will work on is that I understand Josh and Xing are not with us today, but DSG will follow up, and in the email at the end of the session, you'll be able to get some of their inputs and some of their thoughts as well. A big thank you to Colin, a big thank you to Park, and I really appreciate the audience. I think there are a lot of questions, very interesting questions that have come in fast and furious, and hopefully I tried to cover as much as I could. But thank you so much to everyone.
Pleasure.
So thank you so much once again, Zhijie, Park, as well as Colin, for sharing your experience with our audience. We did have quite a number of questions, and we did end up covering a range of topics as well as questions to cater to our student groups and professionals in this webinar today. So hopefully you've taken away a little something from our panel this afternoon. So for our audience out there, we'll really love to hear from you, okay? We'll appreciate it if you could help us to complete a short survey on this webinar to help us to improve on our future programs. And for our SIDS members, just a gentle reminder for you to fill in this survey form with your relevant details to qualify for the CPD points. Please do expect a waiting period of about 3 weeks for your CPD points to be credited. Finally, I have to tell you about this special giveaway that we're doing where you can win yourself an exclusive Singapore Design Week 2022 t-shirt plus an exclusive hard copy of the PDA 2020 publication when you share with us your greatest takeaway from this webinar. Shouldn't be difficult, we covered quite a fair bit. So please do scan the QR code for the survey form. And if you would like to find out more about the various upcoming programs at the National Design Center, please do also scan the QR code that you see on the screen right now. And with that, we have come to the end of the session today. So I just want to thank you all once again. Thank you to our speakers, thank you to our moderator, and of course, our audience for spending your Thursday afternoon with us. We definitely look forward to seeing you at our future events. Have a very good evening ahead, and goodbye.